My name is Mara Hayes, and I was 38 years old, homeless, and curled tightly in the back seat of my aging silver Toyota when a hard knock against the window jolted me awake. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, hearing my mother's voice again in my head, repeating the words she had said so many times that they felt carved into my bones. "You were always going to fail, Mara." But when I wiped the fog from the blast, the shape standing outside wasn't her. It was a police officer, his flashlight cutting sharply across my face like a blade of cold light. My heart pounded as I lowered the window slightly, my fingers trembling from exhaustion and fear. Nights like this had become routine. Parking lots, gas stations, empty streets, always moving, always hiding, pretending I still had control over my life. "License and registration," the officer said, his voice calm but firm. I handed him the papers, forcing myself to breathe slowly while telling myself this was just another routine stop, just another warning, just another night surviving 1 hour at a time. But when he walked back to his patrol car and ran my license, something changed. I saw it immediately in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way he leaned closer to his screen as if reading something impossible. When he returned to my car, his hand hovered near his belt, not grabbing his weapon, but resting dangerously close to it. That alone made my pulse spike with panic. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need you to step out of the vehicle slowly." The words hit me like ice water. "Officer, what's happening?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He hesitated before answering, then swallowed as if choosing his words carefully. "There's a federal notice attached to your identity file," he said, "and Homeland Security has requested your exact location." The world around me tilted. Homeland Security? The words didn't make sense in my exhausted mind. 6 months earlier, I had been living a completely different life, working full-time as a logistics coordinator in a Denver office, paying my rent on time, and believing that stability was permanent. I was never rich, but I was comfortable, safe. At least, I thought I was. My family, however, never saw me as successful. My mother made sure of that. At every gathering, she compared me to my younger sister, Elise, the golden child with perfect hair, perfect job, and perfect life. Elise sold luxury homes and posted pictures of beach vacations and expensive dinners, while I spent my evenings working overtime just to stay ahead of bills. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. I always felt like I was competing in a race I had already lost. The collapse of my life began quietly, almost invisibly. One afternoon, my debit card stopped working while I was paying for groceries. I assumed it was a technical error until I checked my account and saw charges I didn't recognize, large ones. Designer purchases, online transfers, restaurant bills I never made. My chest tightened as panic spread through me. The bank confirmed what I feared most. Multiple credit accounts had been opened under my name months earlier. When I traced the billing address, my stomach dropped. It matched the neighborhood where my sister lived. I drove to her house immediately, my heart racing, hoping there had been some terrible mistake. But when she opened the door and saw me standing there with printed bank statements in my hand, her face didn't show surprise. It showed irritation. When I demanded answers, she shrugged like the situation was nothing. She claimed it was temporary, insisted she planned to pay everything back, and told me to stop acting dramatic. Her husband leaned against the counter behind her, smirking as if my panic was entertainment. What hurt most was when my mother stepped forward from the hallway, revealing she had been listening the entire time. Instead of defending me, she sided with them, telling me to stop causing trouble and accusing me of jealousy. That moment shattered something inside me. Weeks later, lawsuits began arriving in my mailbox for unpaid balances tied to accounts I never opened. My employer reduced my hours because of financial risk concerns. Soon after, my landlord refused to renew my lease. When I asked my mother if I could stay with her temporarily, she looked me in the eyes and told me to face the consequences of my own mistakes, mistakes that weren't even mine. That was how I ended up living in my car, learning which parking lots were safest to sleep in and which gas stations allowed people to stay overnight without calling security. Days blurred into nights, nights blurred into exhaustion. Hunger became familiar, cold became constant, and loneliness became suffocating. I stopped calling friends because I didn't want to explain what had happened. Shame followed me everywhere like a shadow I couldn't escape. I began believing the words my mother repeated throughout my childhood, that I was weak, that I ruined everything, that failure was inevitable. Then came the night the officer knocked on my window, the night everything changed. After hearing about the federal notice on my file, fear crawled up my spine like ice. Minutes later, black SUVs arrived without sirens, moving quietly into the empty lot. A woman stepped out, dressed in a dark coat with a badge clipped at her waist. Her presence felt heavy, authoritative, and impossible to ignore. She introduced herself calmly as a federal investigator and asked me a question that made my stomach twist: whether I remembered my uncle, a man who died when I was 12 in what everyone called an accident. Memories I had buried deep inside my mind began to surface. Flashes of fire, loud noises, my mother dragging me away from chaos. The investigator revealed something I never expected. My uncle had been involved in exposing criminal activity decades earlier, and before his death, he'd placed a protective alert connected to my identity in case danger ever reached me. According to her, the sudden collapse of my life, the stolen identity, financial ruin, isolation, was not random misfortune. It was part of a long chain of secrets someone had been trying to hide for years. As the truth unfolded, everything I believed about my family began to crumble. The betrayal I once believed came from selfishness alone was tied to fear, guilt, and secrets buried deep in the past. For the first time in my life, I realized something powerful. I had never been the failure my family claimed I was. I was the person they feared the most, the one who unknowingly held the truth that could destroy everything they built on lies. In the months that followed, investigations exposed crimes stretching back decades. People who once controlled my life lost their power. The lies that pushed me into homelessness were uncovered, and slowly, piece by piece, my stability returned. I moved into a small apartment of my own, stood on my balcony one evening watching the sunset, and felt something unfamiliar spreading through my chest. Peace. Not revenge, not anger, just freedom. Looking back now, I understand that the worst moments of my life were never proof of weakness. They were proof of survival. Every night I spent alone in that car, every insult I endured, every betrayal that broke my trust, all of it led me to the truth. I was never the failure they said I was. I was the survivor they could never silence. And for the first time in my life, I finally believed that my story was not about loss. It was about strength waiting to be discovered.